Welcome to 10. My name is Thomas Kolster. 10 is all you need to stay up to date on the intersection of sustainability and marketing. I'm very, very happy to have Rory Sutherland here today, who is the Vice Chairman of Ogilvy in the UK, and also a behavior change expert. Before that was even fashionable.
In as much as you can be an expert, yeah.
Exactly. We like to throw around this expert word when we do podcasts, right? But what I really wanted to talk to Rory was that I've always loved your perspectives on what it takes to drive behavior change. And I think going into 2024, one of the things I often talk about is how difficult it is, in fact, to change behaviors. So I just wanted to talk to you. Why is this important in the sort of average marketing, the average CMO's toolbox? Why is behavior change such an important thing to look at?
It's important because essentially anything you do that is new, or indeed the maintenance of something old, requires behavior on the part of people. Particularly difficult, by the way, in the case of things which are new or innovative, or in the case of, say, behavioral change for environmental sustainability. And the reason I always give for this is that there are lots and lots of forces in human behavior. There are lots of, I don't call them biases because it's the wrong word, but there are lots of forces acting on how we behave. But the two of the most prominent, if you like, and that are effectively like gravitational forces in that they're continuous, are habit and social proof. And for very obvious evolutionary reasons, we default to do what I've done before and do what everybody else is doing, because those are, if not the optimal course of action, they're the least catastrophic. I've done it before, therefore it's probably safe to do it again because I'm still alive to consider doing it. And lots of other people are doing this, so there must be some sort of logic to it. That's kind of collective intelligence. In fact, an organism which didn't have some sense of habit or social copying would be at an evolutionary disadvantage, because it would have to learn everything through trial and error, and some of those trials and some of those errors would prove fatal. But at the same time, what that means is that when you are trying to get people to change behavior, you are going against the grain to some extent of what humans instinctively like to do. I mean, we can have debates about, in many cases, habit and social copying are perfectly rational and sensible. But when technology changes or circumstances change or challenges change, or indeed you've invented a new product that requires adoption. There's a great quote by Stuart Butterfield, who's the founder of Slack, who says the only really meaningful measure of innovation, as distinct from inventiveness, is behavior change. If your innovation isn't changing fundamentally the way people behave, it's not really an innovation. I'm very interested in the history of this. We completely forget this, but things we take for granted and indeed can't live without today, like electricity in the home, or indeed perhaps the automobile or trains, had to be marketed to begin with. They came up against significant resistance, and I've got one of my favorite ads is from 1916 from the Dublin Corporation, and the ad is "Use electricity." And it's persuading people that electric toasters and electric kettles are actually better, because everybody had pre-existing solutions to those problems. And by default, they prefer, and that I think increases as you get older, they prefer to do things which they've done before. People naturally, system one makes doing things that are familiar very easy. And so as a consequence, every form of behavioral change requires what you might call disproportionate effort, if you like. It's not enough to simply say, this is slightly better than the old thing. By default, people will stick with the old thing.
And in so many ways, you can say, okay, if it goes for a new product, if it goes for the invention of electricity, I think we all figured out that there are some nice benefits to electricity after a while. But suddenly when we zoom in on a topic like sustainability or climate change, or even, as we've seen the ads turn to 30 from the likes of Ariel, Persil and others, it seems like it's much harder to drive those types of behavior changes, because you don't necessarily have the same advantage as you had with electricity. It seems to be more moral driven. So what do you think is needed to drive those behavior changes? Do we need to look at the toolbox differently, or what are some of the things that can help us?
There are two things that can help, one of which is insight, simple insights into why people do the things they do, because until you understand what is driving at the unconscious level an awful lot of behaviors, it's very difficult to actually find the key to unlock real behavioral change. You're actually operating at the surface, not at the root, and it's not really effective. One of the most, if you're interested in the environmental question, one of the most insightful and important books I've ever read is, well, he's written various ones, but I particularly recommend The Darwin Economy by Robert H. Frank, a Cornell economist, who makes the point that a huge amount of human effort is directed to the acquisition of, display of, or consumption of positional or status goods. And what that means is that even after our basic conditions for survival and contentment are met, we will always be engaged in this treadmill of rivalrous consumption, which is complicated because my views on competition are mixed. That there's a kind of benign inventive competition which actually drives resilience, it drives variety, it drives choice and freedom. But there's also hyper competition. And what distinguishes hyper competition is that actually the prize isn't even worth it for the person who wins, and it's hugely deleterious to the people who end up losing. Okay, that would be the most extreme form of hyper competition. I think Ivy League universities, for example, and higher education has become a positional good from being what you might call human capital and what you might call benign, healthy competition. Okay, and what you've seen, and I use this phrase, is that when I went to university in 1988, okay, having a good degree was sufficient to get you a good job, but it wasn't necessary. And now we've expanded higher education, so it's actually necessary but not sufficient. Okay, and as a result, going to university, which after all is expensive, you lose 3 years of earning power. It costs a great deal of money and so forth, has actually become a kind of necessity for people who don't want to do it. Because without actually going through that pretense and getting your credentials, you basically are frozen out of a job market. And that's what I mean about the difference between competition, which is kind of benign and adds to optionality, and competition, which is malign because a large part of human consumption is effectively driven by what you might call relative status seeking, one-upmanship, keeping ahead of the Joneses, perhaps rather than keeping up with the Joneses. Now, it gets complicated when you look at the environmental consequences of that, because I don't know if I believe this or not, okay, but I could make the case that actually buying very high-end luxury goods might be a good thing to do, okay? That actually if you are rich and you buy a Hermes bag, it's never going to end up on landfill until it's absolutely beyond the point of no return, okay? Whereas fast fashion, which is cheaper, is arguably much more deleterious. So it's complicated. I mean, one of the things that we don't, when we buy things, we tend to be disproportionately concerned by the immediate hit of acquisition rather than the long-term happiness they deliver. And it could be that, buying a Rolex is actually quite a good use of your money. And, going off to Temu or Shein is actually really rather bad.
I absolutely love that little piece of advice here, and a very good way of looking at how difficult it is, in fact, to change people's behaviors. So thank you, Rory, and to the rest of our listeners. We will keep 10 going and hopefully to inform you on what you need to know.